We received testimony from Dr. Carmen Reinhardt at the University of Maryland, who presented, I believe, the most exhaustive study of debt crises that I'm aware of, covering 44 nations over 200 years. She has come across with the conclusion through her study that when nations have a debt to GDP ratio of 90%, that they will actually lose economic growth. Her study says, I believe the average, I believe it was the mean, was 1 percentage point. So if your economic growth was averaging 3%, it would fall by a third to 2%. I think her study also showed that in the U.S., that in our nation's history, we actually have received negative economic growth at those points where debt to GDP has reached 90%. By a back-of-the-envelope calculation, gross debt in the U.S. to GDP is now 89%. I know debt held by public, I believe, is closer to 60%. My question is, are you familiar with the professor's study? Are you familiar with her conclusions? Do you agree or disagree?
I am familiar with her study, and I would say that her book with Ken Rogoff on debt crises and financial crises is an extraordinary piece of work that includes analyses of, as you say, dozens of crises. On this particular issue, I agree with the general point that as debt increases, interest rates increase. That tends to make investment more costly. Tax rates go up.
But I'm sorry, since time is limited, specifically gross debt to GDP of 90%, where essentially we're at that tipping point now. Do you believe that the U.S. is at a tipping point with respect to its debt?
I don't think there's anything magic about 90%. However, I do think that if we were to go out as, say, the CBO's alternative scenario projects, then debt and interest payments are going to get explosive in 10 or 15 years. And so I think we are close to a situation where we need to be paying very close attention to our fiscal sustainability.
In your